without hesitation. After all, her life in Chicago had hit a pause. Her relationship of 6 years had ended 3 months ago. And though there were no loud fights or betrayals, the silence between her and her ex had been the loudest goodbye. She needed space. She needed stillness. Claire's house in upstate New York, tucked between the trees and far from her old apartment, was the perfect escape. The house was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. And for Anna, that was both a blessing and a curse. She tied her hair into a loose bun and wiped down the kitchen counters for the second time, more out of habit than need. The lemon-scented cleaner filled the air, mixing with the soft sound of leaves brushing the windows. Outside, the trees were turning golden. The October sun poured through the windows, lighting the wooden floor in soft amber. It should have felt peaceful, but Anna's chest carried a weight, the ache of a heart not quite healed. The loneliness that comes after too many silent dinners. Too many what-ifs. She reached for the broom and moved into the living room, humming quietly to herself. The radio played something old and soft in the background. The room was warm, familiar. She'd visited Claire so many times over the years, especially during holidays, but being here alone was different. Everything reminded her of something, or someone. Suddenly, the front door opened. Anna paused mid-sweep. Her heart gave a small jolt. Claire wasn't due back for another 2 weeks. No one else was supposed to be here. "Hello," she called out, carefully peeking toward the entryway. A moment later, footsteps echoed through the hall, steady, confident, unmistakably familiar. And then he appeared. "Hey," Matthew said, standing in the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Anna blinked, almost unsure if she was imagining him. "Matthew," he smiled. "Didn't expect you here. Mom told me she'd be gone, but she didn't mention you were house-sitting." "I could say the same," Anna said, surprised at how different he looked. Taller, a little broader, with that calm presence he always carried. But something else had changed, too. He looked older, more grounded. The boy she remembered was gone. The man standing in front of her was someone entirely new. "I just got back from Vermont. Figured I'd stay a few days before heading to Boston for a job interview," he said, walking in slowly. "Guess I should have checked in first." She laughed lightly. "No harm done. There's plenty of room." He dropped his bag by the stairs and looked around. "Smells clean, like citrus and memories." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Matthew grinned. It is. You always did bring life into a room." That comment caught her off guard. She looked away, pretending to adjust a frame on the shelf. "I didn't expect to run into you," she admitted, still facing the wall. Matthew stepped closer, his voice lower. "I used to hope I would, honestly, but I never thought it'd be like this." Anna turned to look at him, brows slightly raised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, trying to play it cool, but his eyes gave him away. There was something behind them, something unspoken. "I always noticed you," he said, "even when I was younger. You were different than the other adults. You listened. You laughed like you meant it. You had this light about you." Anna didn't know what to say. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Calm, honest, no pressure, no game. Just truth. "I was older," she said gently, trying to keep things light. "You still are," he said with a soft chuckle. "But sometimes age doesn't matter as much as timing." She looked at him then, really looked. The soft curve of his smile, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet way he stood like he wasn't afraid of silence. There was no denying it. Something in the room had shifted. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "you hungry? There's some soup on the stove." "Only if you're joining me," he replied. They sat at the kitchen table that evening, sharing soup and old stories. Anna told him about her writing projects, the ones she never finished. He told her about Vermont, about missing home, about wanting to do more than just chase titles and paychecks. Conversation flowed easily, like old friends picking up a thread that had always been there by the time he left to go upstairs. It was dark outside. Anna stood in the kitchen alone, her fingers brushing the edge of her mug. She hadn't laughed like that in months. She hadn't felt seen in even longer. And yet, she reminded herself, this was Claire's son. He was 10 years younger. A friend's child, a boundary not to be crossed. But as she turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to her room, her mind kept returning to his words. I used to hope I'd run into you again, and for the first time in a long while. The thought of what might come next didn't scare her. It stirred something else. Hope. The next morning, Anna woke earlier than usual. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. She could hear light footsteps upstairs. Matthew was awake too. She moved through the kitchen, brewing coffee like always, but her hands felt clumsy, distracted. She kept thinking about what he'd said the day before. I used to hope I'd run into you again. It had been unexpected. Honest? Too honest? Maybe by the time Matthew came downstairs, she was already at the table, sipping from her mug. He greeted her with a soft smile, carrying the same calm energy from the night before. "Morning," he said. "Grabbing a cup." "Morning," she replied, her voice quiet but not cold. They sat together, both sipping coffee, watching the trees sway through the window. It was strange how easy it felt, like they'd done this 100 times before. Yet under that ease, something new was quietly building. Over the next few days, Matthew stayed around the house. He didn't say much about where else he could be, and Anna didn't ask. He helped with small things, bringing in firewood, fixing the loose cabinet door, changing a bulb in the hallway. And every evening they'd end up at the kitchen table or on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Anna learned more about him than she ever expected. He wasn't just Claire's son anymore. He was his own person, thoughtful, quiet, smart in a way that didn't show off. He talked about grad school, his love for creative writing, and how lost he felt trying to figure out what came next. He said he didn't want a job that just paid the bills. He wanted purpose, and he really listened. When Anna talked about her breakup, her failed writing dreams, the way she sometimes felt invisible in rooms full of people, he didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, hearing her. It was something she didn't realize she'd missed until then, one afternoon. They sat in the living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. Anna was curled up with a book when Matthew spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, voice low. She nodded. "Sure. Do you ever regret it? The choices you made?" She looked up slowly. "All the time. But I try not to stay there too long. Regret's a heavy thing to carry." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I think I've been afraid of choosing wrong. So I keep putting things off. Careers, places, even people." Anna tilted her head. "What people?" He gave a half smile. "You know?" She didn't answer right away. She could feel her heartbeat rising. Not from fear, but from the realization that this wasn't just harmless talking anymore. Something was shifting between them, and both of them knew it. "Matthew," she said carefully, "we have a history. But not the kind that leads to this." "I know," he said softly. "But maybe that's why it matters." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how this happened so fast. Was it just loneliness? The comfort of a familiar face during a vulnerable time? Or had this been quietly building all along, unnoticed until now? She remembered the little moments, him watching her with quiet attention. Remembering things she'd said years ago, how he always made space for her words. Maybe she'd ignored it back then because it felt impossible. But now, sitting across from him each day, laughing at shared memories, trusting him with thoughts she hadn't spoken in years, it didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt real the next day, while sorting through old books in Claire's study. Anna found an old letter she never sent, something she wrote to her ex right after the breakup. It was folded between the pages of a notebook. She sat down, reading her own words. They were raw, honest, filled with the kind of pain that came from loving someone who slowly stopped seeing you. She was still holding the letter when Matthew walked in. "What's that?" he asked gently. Anna hesitated. Then, without thinking too much, she handed it to him. He read it silently. The room felt still. When he finally looked up, There was something different in his expression. Not pity, not discomfort, but something deeper. He looked at her like he truly saw her. All of her. "I wish I'd known you felt this way," he said quietly. "I wish I could have told you, back then, that you deserved more than that." She looked down. "It was a long time ago." "But the way you write," he said, folding the paper gently, "you feel things deeply. That's rare." They sat in silence for a while. No music, no distractions. Just the sound of rain and hearts beating a little louder than usual. Then Matthew spoke again. "I don't know what happens after this week. I don't know if I'll be back in Vermont or in some office in Boston. But I know one thing." Anna turned to face him. "I'd regret not saying this. I want to know you. Not as Mom's friend. Not from a distance. I want to know you. The way you laugh, the way you think, the way you hide your heart in quiet places." Her eyes welled up. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for someone to look at her like she was worth chasing. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and wrapped her arms around herself. "Matthew, this isn't simple." "I know," he said behind her, "but maybe it's still worth it." She didn't turn around. She just stood there, looking at the rain, because something inside her was breaking open, not in pain, but in hope. Quiet, patient hope. He didn't push. He didn't ask her to decide. He just said, "I'll be here, however you need me to be." And with that, he left the room, leaving behind a stillness filled with more emotion than noise could ever carry. Anna stood there long after he left, heartful, unsure of what came next, but for the first time in a long while. She wasn't afraid to find out. The days passed quickly, and the atmosphere in the house changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was warm, alive, filled with something unspoken. Anna and Matthew fell into a rhythm that felt natural. Morning coffee became their shared ritual. He'd help in the garden, or read on the porch while she cleaned, or wrote in her journal. They didn't talk about the moment they shared in the study, the letter, the rain, the quiet confession, but it lingered between them, soft and steady like background music. Matthew never pushed. He didn't pressure her for answers or talk about feelings unless she did first. And maybe that's why Anna found herself opening up. They'd sit on the back steps in the late afternoon sun, talking about everything: childhood, dreams, mistakes, fears, the feeling of being stuck between who you used to be and who you're becoming. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in soft pink and gold, Matthew handed her a worn notebook. "It's not finished," he said. "Just some poems and journal entries. Stuff I've never shown anyone." Anna flipped through the pages slowly, reading lines that felt raw, honest, and filled with quiet longing. His words were beautiful and real. She looked up at him, touched. "You write like someone twice your age," she said. He smiled. "I feel older than I am most days." That made her laugh, but it also made her heart ache a little. She knew that feeling too well. Later that night, Anna sat in the living room, reading his notebook again while Matthew was upstairs. She hadn't told him yet, but she was working on something too, something she hadn't done in years. A story? Fiction, maybe? But it felt more like pieces of her life rearranged into something safer. His presence had unlocked something in her she thought was gone. The desire to create, to feel, to be seen. As she set his notebook aside, she pulled out her own journal. There was a folded letter inside, not the one Matthew had read, but another one. This one was never addressed. She had written it during her loneliest days after the breakup, pouring everything she couldn't say aloud onto paper. Something made her get up and walk to the stairs. She found him in the hallway, leaning against the wall, headphones around his neck. "Can I show you something?" she asked. He nodded, following her down to the living room. She handed him the letter and sat quietly as he read it. The letter spoke of emptiness, of being with someone who never really saw her, of staying quiet just to keep the peace, of slowly disappearing into the background of her own life. It wasn't bitter, just honest. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes full of emotion. "You're not invisible," he said. "Not now. Not with me." His words hit something deep. Not because they were romantic, but because they were kind. She didn't realize how much she needed kindness until it was right in front of her. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, wind rustled the trees. Inside, the space between them grew smaller, not physically, but emotionally. "You make me want to try again," she said quietly. "Too, right? To live. To feel something good without waiting for it to break." He nodded. "You already are." That night, they didn't touch, didn't kiss, didn't cross any lines. But something passed between them, a trust. The connection that neither of them could deny. The next day, they drove into town together. It was a simple trip. Coffee, a walk by the lake, a stop at a used bookstore. But it felt like more. Like they were testing what life might feel like outside the walls of Claire's house at the bookstore. Matthew picked up an old copy of The Bell Jar and handed it to her. "You mentioned this once, years ago," he said. "Said it changed how you saw yourself." She stared at him, stunned. "You remembered that?" He shrugged, smiling. "I remember a lot about you." And just like that, her heart did something she hadn't felt in a long time, it hoped. When they got back to the house, a strange quiet fell between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken thoughts. Matthew sat on the porch steps, staring out at the trees. "I'm leaving in 4 days," he said suddenly. "Back to Vermont for now. Then maybe Boston, if the job works out." Anna stood beside him, her arms crossed against the chill. "I know. I don't want this to be a pause in your life," he said. "I don't want to be the thing you forget when things go back to normal." She looked at him, heart full. "You're not a pause, Matthew. You're the first person who made me feel like I wasn't just passing time." He looked up at her. "So, what happens now?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder, and said, "Maybe we stop worrying about what comes next. Maybe we just stay here, in this moment, for as long as we can." And so they did. No promises. No plans. Just presence. That night she wrote again. Not letters this time, a story. One about second chances and unexpected timing. About two people who met in the quiet space between heartbreak and healing. And saw something in each other they'd forgotten existed. And as she wrote, Matthew sat across the room reading a book, glancing up at her every so often with a soft look in his eyes. Not pressure. Not possession, just quiet admiration. Anna didn't know what would happen when he left, or if this feeling would last. But she knew one thing for sure, she didn't feel invisible anymore. And sometimes that's where love begins. The last few days Matthew spent at Claire's house felt like a fragile dream. Beautiful, but with a ticking clock. The leaves outside had deepened into rich reds and browns, and the crisp autumn air reminded Anna that change was coming fast. Neither of them wanted to speak about it much, but the unspoken truth hovered around every conversation. Every glance on the morning of Matthew's last full day, Anna woke early and found him sitting by the window with a cup of tea. He looked peaceful, but she knew there was a storm beneath that calm. She joined him, sitting quietly until he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About staying in the moment, but also about what happens after." Anna turned to him, her heart tight. "It's okay. We don't have to have all the answers." He smiled faintly. "No, I want to talk about it. Because I'm scared. Scared this will all just disappear when I leave. Like it never really happened." She reached out, touching his hand lightly. "It's real, Matthew. It doesn't have to end just because you're not here." He looked at her hand on his and sighed. "I don't want to lose this. You, not again." Her chest tightened. She knew what he meant. She had spent years losing pieces of herself in silence and separation. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for what this might mean. A chance at something new. Something fragile, something real. Later that day, they went for a long walk through the woods near the house. The sky was overcast, and a soft wind stirred the fallen leaves beneath their feet. Neither said much at first. The silence felt heavy but honest, to people trying to find the right words without hurting each other. Matthew stopped by a small clearing, looking up at the gray sky. "I don't want to leave things like this," he said quietly. "Between us. Anna took a deep breath. Me neither. He turned to her, searching her face. I know this might sound crazy, but I want to try. To be more than what we've been, even if it's hard. Even if the timing isn't perfect. She blinked, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. You really mean that? I do, he said. Because I see you, Anna. Not just your past or your pain, but the person you are right now. And I want to be part of your life. If you'll let me. Her heart raced. She thought of all the reasons not to. The years between them, the complications, the fear of getting hurt again. But something deeper stirred inside her. A quiet hope, a willingness to risk. She nodded slowly. I want that too. That evening, they cooked dinner together, laughter filling the kitchen as they moved around each other with ease. The tension that had been there all week softened, replaced by something warm and light. After dinner, they sat by the fire, sipping tea and sharing dreams for the first time in a long time. Matthew spoke about his hopes for the future, maybe graduate school, maybe a writing career, maybe staying closer to home for a while. Anna shared her own dreams, finishing her novel, starting fresh, learning to love again. They realized their paths didn't have to be perfect to walk side by side. The next morning, Claire called. She was coming home earlier than expected. Anna felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't sure what Claire would think about Matthew and her growing closeness. But before she could worry too much, Matthew took her hand. Whatever happens, he said, we face it together. When Claire arrived, the house was filled with familiar energy again. But something was different. Anna noticed the way Claire looked at her son, proud but also curious. She sensed the unspoken questions hovering beneath the surface. One afternoon, Claire found Anna and Matthew in the garden, talking quietly. She smiled warmly and said, "You two look like you've been plotting something." Anna laughed, the sound light and free. "Just enjoying the last days before you're back." Claire's eyes softened. "I'm glad you're here, Anna, for both of us." Anna realized then how much this place this time had changed her. She wasn't the same person who arrived weeks ago, broken and unsure. She was stronger, braver, open to love again. On Matthew's last night, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. Watching stars peek through the dark sky, "I'm going to miss this," Anna said softly. "Me too," Matthew replied. "But it's not really goodbye. It's a new beginning." They leaned into each other, not rushing, just feeling the quiet connection that had grown between them. Before he left the next morning, Matthew handed Anna a small envelope. "Open it when you're ready," he said. Anna watched him walk away, heart full of both hope